Okay, everyone, we'll get started now. Welcome to this climate series, and it's wonderful to have you join us today, uh, especially given all the other things taking place. I'm Rod Downing, and we'll give a quick overview of the entire series and where today's session fits in. So first, a brief overview of the entire series, since some of you, of course, may not have caught all of it or even any of it. This may be your first time, in which case, welcome. While the topic is the climate change crisis, the vision is the flourishing of life for all. All humans, no exceptions, all creatures, all life. Simply put, the peaceable kingdom will only be possible within a flourishing ecosystem. However, the team felt that an information-only series is not enough. So as you can see on the slide, phase 2 will involve world-class scientists and others to clarify the issues and solutions. But we start in phase 1, and this week is the 4th and final session. This phase is to help anchor us to one of the church's golden threads: spirituality, an open heart, a transformative experience, and with more impactful actions. Further to actions, check our website. Apart from having the schedule and other details, there is a tab for actions, which we have started to build. Look them over and see if any action resonates. And every time you get a Zoom invitation, the website is on that email as well. Finally, during this session, you will be going into breakout groups. Please remember some basic rules. We're all God's children. We need each other. That's community. Be sure to separate people from issues and thus grant each person their God-given dignity and self-respect. In doing so, we can all be greatly enriched. So let's get started. Over to you, Joan.
I'm Joan Thompson from Kitchener, Ontario, Canada. And today we're completing our focus on the process of creation through meditation based on Genesis chapter 1. So get comfortable in your chair now. Take a few deep breaths. Relax your shoulders. Relax all the muscles of your face, especially your jaw. Breathe in peace and calm. Breathe out tension and anxiety. Just let it all go. Imagine it. In our beginning, billions of years after the Big Bang, after all the incremental cycles of creation for rock, sea, minuscule organics, soil, plants, and animals of every kind, eventually there came to be our ancestors. Then God said, "Let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish, the birds, the cattle, the wild animals, and over everything that creeps upon the earth." So God created humankind in God's image. male and female, God created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over every living thing that moves upon the earth." Today, our scientists tell us that if we equate all that has happened since the formation of this planet Earth, our home, into a time scale of 6 days, then the earliest mammals appeared in the afternoon of that 6th day. And our hominid ancestors did not appear until 5 minutes before midnight. For more than 99.9% of the history of this planet, there was no humankind. For those hundreds of millions of years before us, there was no domination of one species above another, just coexistence, balance, and harmony. The earliest hominids, about 2 million years ago, though not yet like us, were a giant evolutionary leap forward, with unique abilities for language and tool making and clothing. Later came those who learned to control fire and cook food. And finally, about 25,000 years ago, Homo sapiens. On our time scale of 6 days of creation, this was just a few seconds ago. And in those few seconds, we have come to absolutely dominate this earth. We have thought and learned, analyzed and communicated, and created wondrous things ourselves. Cathedrals and skyscrapers, universities and hospitals, satellites and spaceships, but also now crumbling sewage systems and nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction. We dump toxic chemicals into the seas and burn down rainforests. With all the evolutionary advances of our species, we have become the most separated from the harmony of the divine creation. We alone of all life build systems of beliefs by which we rule our lives and make judgments. We oppress others because of slight differences in genetics, which we have decided make some less valuable than others. We kill not to survive, but because of artificial constructs of religion or nationality, or all too often for political and economic power. And we have come to believe that we are smarter, we are more important, and we are more sacred than any other form of life. But we are also an adaptable species and can learn hard lessons and have the potential to transform both our lives and the lives of others. And there was evening and there was morning, the 6th day of the creation. And God saw that all of it together was very good. May we continue to expand the gratitude in our hearts and minds and look with eyes of awe and reverence as we continue to create with God. And it shall continue to be good. Amen.
Hello, my name is Dean White from Bellingham, Washington. Welcome to this fourth conversation in our series. We focused in our first three conversations on preparing the spiritual ground for our personal engagement in climate change work. We explored how we experience nature as refuge. We shared about the sacredness of creation and why it matters. And in these first two conversations, we read poetry texts and used the spiritual practice of Lectio Divina to allow those sacred texts to enter and change our hearts. In our third conversation, we gave holy attention not to texts, but to nature in its simplest forms in order to awaken our hearts. We took notice of a flower, gazed on its beauty in all its dimensions, cherished its details, and blessed its presence. We also gave attention to the harsher realities of human activity and climate disruption. In today's conversation, we will begin to explore how we may create hope by building a bridge to the future. The spiritual practice of Lectio Divina often focuses on only 4 steps. Read the text as commonly understood, meditate on how it speaks to us, pray in response to the text, and contemplate on how it changes our hearts, minds, and lives. But there's a crucial 5th step in the practice of Lectio Divina: how we might act to make our lives a gift for others. It is ultimately in acting from the place of our change that we begin making a difference that may save this earth for our children and future generations. Notice that this is a circular process, which we repeat at every encounter with sacred text in whatever form, each leading to new discernment for action. It's similar to a process we're referring to as the prophetic spiral, shown on this slide, which Susan will call your attention to in a simpler version and invite you to a period of reflection and journaling.
Hi, I'm Susan Oxley from Seattle, Washington. In our coming sessions, we'll move steadfastly toward focusing on our response to the climate crisis we face. Now, response requires action, but not more than just knowledge. Different people have different levels of feeling comfortable with taking action on an issue, and that's okay. There's many layers of activity and advocacy needed. For instance, you can become active on the personal level by identifying ways to decrease your own contribution to global warming. You may want to join with like-minded neighbors to take local community action in your neighborhood or municipality. You can write letters, make phone calls, or participate in peaceful rallies to influence state or provincial governments. You can even join global efforts to advocate for change. The important thing is for each person to find the place where she, he, or they can solidly take a stand and make a difference. A helpful tool in making the transition from awareness to action is the prophetic spiral you see before you. It calls us to see, discern, and act. In ever-widening, expanding circles. Right now, we'll focus on the first step in that spiral using a familiar starting point. Our mission prayer begins, God, where will your spirit lead today? We open our eyes, our minds, and our hearts to truly see God's activity in the world. I invite you to take some time now for silent reflection and journaling on some questions that you see before you. Where do we see God's concerns, not our own, taking priority in our environment? What effect does climate crisis have on the people around us, especially those we don't want to see, the invisible, the marginalized, suffering? What effect does it have on the earth itself? See, discern, act. Make yourselves comfortable in your chair. Release all stress and anxiety. Take some deep cleansing breaths. And let's use the next few moments to reflect on the questions before you. Then write your reflections in your journal or formulate responses in your mind. It will be a time of private work and silence.
I'd like to invite you to bring your attention back now to the group following this period of reflection and journaling. In our conversation today, we're focused on hope. I want to share a perspective on hope from my own personal life's experience. 30 years ago, I was working with serious juvenile offenders. One of these young men was doing time for taking the life of another person. He was 14 years old and would be locked up until he was 21. Over those 7 years of working with him, I felt like I got to know him pretty well. But in one of our conversations, he told me I would never understand people like him. He said, "There is no hope for people like us." I really wanted to help him prove to himself that he was wrong. Hope has always been at the center of my core, of my being. And so here we are in a world where hope can't get lost. In the past few weeks, I've been looking for a poem or a reading for this session. I came across a lot of beautiful poems, but none of them really reached my core. On Saturday, October 10th, I went to the Bellingham Farmers Market as usual to walk and think, to have conversation, to look for hope, and to pray. As I was leaving the market, there was a person sitting at a small typewriter, an old typewriter, kind of dressed like an old journalist. I watched for a while before I noticed a sign saying, "Would you like me to write a poem for you?" When she finished typing, she looked up at me and said, "Would you like a poem?" I didn't hesitate and told her yes. She asked my name and we engaged in conversation. I told her I wanted a poem on building a bridge for hope, for a future in these challenging times. She paused and looked at me and said, "Well, this will take a little more time. Can you come back later?" We talked a little more and I left. I sent Dean 2 hours later to pick up the poem, and this is what she had written. When we come to the abyss, snakes, fire, midnight holes, nightmares, whatever down below, we know we must sing the old refrain of hope. It is only by singing out we are heard. It is the rising of the voice that changes the singer. We must be brave enough to be changed. For in the speaking, we are changed. In the trying to name, we are discovered. It is the taking of steps that calls. It is the taking of steps that calls the earth to rise to meet it. What needs to be found can only be built stone by stone, pebble by pebble, hope by hope, word by word, many speakers, many singers, many builders, waiting to be told what to do. But what is needed has never been done before. We all must be the blind leaders in the dark, mouths dry and singing prayers off key, our hands full of dust and pebbles of our grandmother's seed. Be the mad woman leading the way. Trust your love. Trust this path will change you. Trust others will join you. The only way off this crumbling cliff is to build this bridge. As you go every day to the edge of what you know of yourself, and then go beyond. There you will find others singing a familiar song, becoming a new way together. There will be no name for this new place until long after we are gone. But you feel it calling. praying you into being. Go, fly, do it now. I will join you. In a moment, I'll ask Sean to place us into our small breakout rooms. Please share briefly in your groups who you are and where you are from, your community or congregation, or wherever you identify as your place. Then from your journaling, share with each other about these questions. We are on this side of the climate crisis abyss. What do you see about our current reality that breaks your heart? What do you discern you might bring to the task of building this bridge to our future? What stones, pebbles, or words, or hope might you contribute? We'll put the questions in a chat box for you to refer to. Please share your responses to question 1. Then as you discuss your questions, the answers to question 2, think of an example you might share in the chat room when we reconvene. We'll have 15 minutes. You'll be alerted when you have about 1 minute remaining. Sean? Please feel free, if there are thoughts you have from your conversations that you'd like to share, feel free to type them in the chat. What pebbles might you contribute? I'll pause for a few seconds to allow that before proceeding. Lori?
Well, as I listened to this poem the very first time I heard it, the first line that really struck out to me was, "There will be no name for this new place until long after we are gone." And that question comes up, how shall I act, and how shall I be okay with acting? How shall I hope, whether or not I will ever see the fruits of my own efforts, whether or not if it carries beyond my lifetime. There's a peace activist and international conflict manager named John Paul Lederach, and he insists that the deep social and cultural transformations, especially the ones that are needed to address the magnitude of ecosystem collapse and climate crisis, takes place across generational time. And so this is what he asks us to do. Imagine what the world was like at the birth of the oldest person who held you when you were a baby. The oldest person who held you when you were a baby. And then imagine what the world will be like when the infant and the smallest, youngest person in your family or your circle that you hold in your arms will come to the end of his or her life. Then he says, you are held and touched, and you will touch the lives of people that cover a 200-year present moment. So we're part of a pattern of divine creativity that is so much bigger and so much more far-reaching than our own limited moments on this earth. And yet, paradoxically, what we do, the choices we make, matter. We are building bridges to the future. We may not see what that future holds, but we can hope. I want to say this, though. When we talk about, as Christians, about hope, we have to be clear. We are not talking about wishful thinking. We're not talking about being able to control God or the direction of the unfolding creativity of this universe. We're not talking about those false kinds of hopes. We're talking about a fiercer kind of hope, a hope that is prophetic, that penetrates these illusions of separateness, of entitlement, of specialness, of exceptionalism, all those things that cloud our vision. The kind of hope that we're looking for sees beneath and beyond all this fragmentation and recognizes an interdependent wholeness, the really real God. It calls us to action as co-creators and to become agents in bringing about a new creation. Václav Havel, who was the first president of Czechoslovakia, says to me some really important things about the nature of hope. Hope, he says, is a state of mind, not a state of the world. Either we have hope within us or we don't. Hope is an orientation of the spirit, an orientation of our hearts. Hope transcends the world that is immediately experienced and is anchored somewhere beyond its horizons. Hope in this deep and powerful sense is not the same as joy that things are going well, or a willingness to invest in enterprises that are obviously headed for success, but rather an ability to work for something because it is good, not just because it stands a chance to succeed. The more unpromising the situation in which we demonstrate hope, the deeper that hope is. So hope is not the same thing as optimism. It is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense regardless of how it turns out. A few more lines from the poem. What is needed has never been done before. We must be brave enough to be changed, and we are becoming a new way together.
Some of you may have heard Community of Christ President Steve Veazey when he spoke in the Greater Pacific Northwest Mission Center service on October 11th. President Veazey acknowledged what confronts us. Amid all the challenges besetting humanity, we're facing a climate crisis due to global warming that boggles the mind. As a prophetic people, called to cooperate with God to reconcile, heal, and seek peace in and for creation, we cannot turn away in denial, fatigue, or fear. Reinhold Niebuhr was a Christian pastor and theologian who wrote between the world wars and then after World War II, when he joined the faculty of New York City's Union Theological Seminary as a professor of ethics. His writings pushed back against the romantic notion that humanity was on a steady path to perfection. In Moral Man and Immoral Society, his point was that as individuals, our reason leads us to act with morality, but at the level of corporations and nations, greed and selfishness often take over. Society becomes divided between the powerful and the powerless, and the only way to counter oppressive power is with competing power organized on behalf of the oppressed. Yet amid all the seemingly endless struggle, he understood that hope is what extends our vision beyond our own limited horizons. Nothing, he said, that is worth doing can be achieved in our lifetime. Therefore, we must be saved by hope. Niebuhr saw that the excessive concern of unfettered capitalist economies with profit and loss would perpetuate injustice. Martin Luther King, to instill hope in people of color after 400 years of physical and economic oppression, talked instead about a different kind of P&L, profit and loss, not actually profit and loss, but the intersection of power and love. He wrote that power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love. As we move into phase 2 of our sessions together, dealing with the climate crisis, we'll revisit the relationship between the climate and racial justice and sustainable economic life. For now, let me share again words from President Stephen Vesey. Here is what the prophetic heart and mind of a prophetic faith community perceives. There are several major interrelated crises overtaking the world right now, and widespread cooperative action is needed. The church is called to be a prophetic voice through all our voices, to awaken others to the reality of climate change due to human-induced global warming and the adverse impacts already occurring. A prophetic people will not only advocate for action, a prophetic people envision an alternative future in harmony with God's nature and purposes for creation. A prophetic people engage in initiatives that seek the best future for humankind and creation. And a prophetic people seek just solutions that secure the well-being of the most vulnerable. A prophetic people always pray, plan, and act in hope. We're reminded by Steve's words of that prophetic spiral we mentioned earlier in its simplest form. Susie?
We are challenged in the community of Christ by Stephen Vesey's words to live out our calling as a prophetic people, especially in relation to the climate crisis we face. As you will learn in the sessions in phase 2 of this series, the people of North America have an inordinately large impact on the climate because of our lifestyles and our consumption of resources way in excess of our proportion to the world's population. What are we to do? Here again are the words from my humble new poet. When we come to the abyss, snakes, fire, midnight holes, nightmares, whatever down below, we know we must sing the old refrain of hope. It is only by singing out that we are heard. It is the raising of the voice that changes the singer. We must be brave enough to be changed. In the trying to name, we are discovered. It is the taking of the step that calls. It is the taking of the step that calls the earth to rise to meet it. What needs to be found can only be built stone by stone, pebble by pebble, hope by hope, word by word. Many speakers, many singers, many builders waiting to be told what to do. But what is needed has never been done before. We all must be the blind leaders in the dark, mouths dry and singing prayers off keys, our hands full of dust and pebbles and our grandmother's seeds. Be the mad woman leading the way. Trust your love. Trust this path will change you. Trust others will join you. The only way off this crumbling cliff is to build this bridge. As you go every day to the edge of what you know of yourself, and then go beyond. There you will find others singing a familiar song, becoming a new way together. There will be no name for this new place until long after we are gone. But you feel it calling, praying you into being. Go, fly. Do it now. I will join you. As we go into our second breakout groups, consider the following questions. Look beyond your horizon. What is your vision of life on the earth, on the other side of the bridge that we're building? What transformations in your life must occur to embody this vision? You'll now be placed back in your breakout groups. Share your thoughts on these questions. We'll have about 15 minutes. Sean? Thank you, all of you who have shared. Rod?
Did he mute himself?
Yeah. Tricky when you got several screens to find that one that says unmute. So thank you all for your participation. Our group, yeah, some great ideas, and as I'm sure in your. As we close, we're not quite at the end, but I want to extend an invitation to phase 2 of our series. This is the end of phase 1, but we're just getting started. We're going into phase 2 of our series. I'll share a couple thoughts on that, and then there'll be a sending forth by Joan. So, phase 2 of our series starts next month, November 15th. And again, you'll all be given emails with the Zoom link ahead of time. We are just getting started because the discernment aspect of spirituality requires the very best insights. And we will have world-class presenters, starting with climate scientist Professor Richard Gammon. Professor Gammon was educated at Princeton and Harvard, and he was the co-author of the very first report of the UN's International Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC. That's an acronym you're going to hear a lot of. And his report, that very first report, was in 1990, 30 years ago. The IPCC is the umbrella organization that collects and disseminates the research from those thousands of climate scientists one often reads about. So you can imagine, after him watching 30 years of the ensuing dynamics, where the IPCC every 5 years would put out a warning, and then a more dire warning, and then a more dire warning. After 30 years of that, you won't want to miss what he will have to say. For each of these presentations, we will have a week after the presentation, a discussion to dig deeper into how realistically to incorporate the insights of our lives and communities. So it's an attempt by us to go one level more. You listen to the presentation, and then there'll be a Q&A, but then a week later, there will be a couple of opportunities to come back together and say, okay, how do we Okay, got the idea. How do we incorporate it? So, and then at the end, we're also hoping to have follow-up podcasts because there may be even more questions that arise from that. So after November 15th, it'll be Christmas time, and that's a crazy time to have anything. So we're going to bring Professor Gammon back on January 10th to talk about the IPCC recommendations. And then huge bonus is we will then have him enter into a 30-minute dialogue with President Veazey. So this is going to be an incredible opportunity that you won't want to miss. These high-level presentations will continue each month, February, March, through the spring and summer. So check the website for details for the subsequent ones. We haven't fleshed them all out, but they will cover all the basic topics of climate change. So you can be on the lookout for that. And again, if you're registered, you're already going to receive the Zoom link for them. So we can just be on the lookout for that. So this is entering a very exciting phase. Top-notch people from around the world will be joining us to present their insights. Okay, at this point, over to you, Joan.
Thanks, Rod. And so we have come to the end of the Genesis account of creation. In our arrogance and delusions, we thought that humankind was the pinnacle and end point of all creation, that we were to be favored above all and had been given total freedom to do whatever we wanted to with this planet, our plaything. We believed there would be no consequences for our choices or actions, since God would surely bless us and protect us. Surely nothing better could be possible than humankind. Now we see that the eternal God does not rest and has never stopped creating. We just didn't understand the time scale or our place within the whole. And so we stand now at the dawn of the next day of creation. We have given no thought to what God's next step of creation may be, but we can trust that it will be good. Will we choose to usher in God's next day of creation or hinder it by working against the sacredness of all that has been created so far? By the grace of God, we are poised to fulfill God's ultimate vision for us. When our willingness to live in sacred community as new creation exceeds our natural fear of spiritual and relational transformation, we will become who we are called to be. The rise of the peaceable kingdom awaits our wholehearted response. Thank you for sharing with us. Go in peace. Sean, you may unmute all microphones now so that everyone has a chance to say goodbye. And we're going to ask that rather than having conversations between people you haven't seen for a while, We defer those until anyone who has questions or comments about what we've done this evening or we're doing in the future can ask those first in our wrap up. And for those who need to leave, we hope to see you next month. Thank you.